What do you do when your father leaves you everything? Not out of favoritism, not out of manipulation, but because he knew his children clearly enough to understand exactly what would happen if he did not. My father Raymond built the holiday house at Lake Caro himself over 2 summers in the late 1970s. He poured the foundation and framed the walls and shingled the roof with help from 2 friends who came on weekends and were paid in beer and Sunday dinners. It was a 3-bedroom wooden structure on 2 acres with a screened porch that looked out over the water and was the single best place I have ever sat in my entire life. We spent every summer there as children, every Christmas once Dad retired, every long weekend in between. It was the center of the family the way some physical places become the center of a family without anyone deciding that, just by being where everything important happened over 40 years. He left it to me. Not to me and my brother Dennis and my sister Carol. To me, specifically, by name. In a document he had signed 14 months before he died. I found that out. The same afternoon the rest of them found out our father was gone, sitting in an attorney's office while Dennis checked his phone under the table and Carol cried into a tissue she had been holding since morning. I watched their faces when the attorney read the relevant section and understood immediately that this was not going to be a conversation. This was going to be a war. Dennis set his phone face down on the table in a way that was meant to look composed and was not. Carol's crying shifted in pitch in a way that told me it had moved from grief into something else entirely. The attorney asked if there were questions. Dennis said he assumed there had been a drafting error. The attorney said there had not been. Carol asked whether Dad had been of sound mind when the document was signed. The attorney confirmed he had been thoroughly documented, witnessed, notarized, and supported by a medical evaluation 6 months after signing confirming full cognitive capacity. Dennis said he would need to see the supporting documentation. A folder was slid across the table that had clearly been prepared in advance for exactly that response. I did not say much during that meeting. I was processing my own version of shock because while I had known Dad wanted me to have the house, I had not known he had formalized it so completely. Had not known he had anticipated the resistance it would generate and quietly assembled counter-arguments before he died. My father had known his children well enough to predict the exact objections Dennis would raise in a lawyer's office and had prepared for them without saying a word to any of us. He had loved all 3 of us and he had known all 3 of us. And those are sometimes different things. Dennis called me 17 minutes into the drive home. He did not say hello. He said Dad had clearly been manipulated in his final years and he was going to contest the will. I said Dad had not been manipulated and that contesting would cost significant money for a very low probability of success, given the documentation already on file. Dennis said I had obviously been working on Dad for years to cut out the people who could not visit as often. I told him I was hanging up now and we could continue when he was ready to have the conversation without accusations. I did hang up. He called back immediately. I let it go to voicemail and pulled into a gas station and sat there for 10 minutes before I could drive again. Carol called 20 minutes after Dennis. She was calmer in tone but not in content. She said she had been putting her children in that house every summer for 14 years, and that it felt wrong to do this to them when they had grown up expecting it to be part of their lives. I said I understood the situation was painful. She asked what I was planning to do with the property. I said I had not decided yet and needed time to process everything. That was the truth at that moment. It was not the truth 4 weeks later when I called my attorney and told him to begin the listing process. I had been a commercial real estate professional for nearly 2 decades. I understood property values and market timing and what Lake Caro waterfront was worth in the year my father died, considerably more than when he had built it himself in the 1970s. The house needed work. The dock had been neglected for longer than anyone had admitted out loud. The kitchen was 30 years behind the times. 2 of the 3 bedrooms had water damage Dennis had mentioned by text the previous Christmas and then never followed up on. A family sale negotiated between 3 siblings who were already fighting would have taken years and produced a number substantially below market. A proper sale through a competent agent in good conditions would produce a number that was genuinely meaningful, and that number would belong entirely to me. My father had known this too. He had spent 30 years watching Dennis borrow money from family and explain repayment failures with a fluency that almost obscured the pattern. 30 years watching Carol treat the house as a personal extension, making changes without discussion, inviting her in-laws for weeks at a time, managing the booking calendar in ways that made Dennis's technically equal access practically minimal. He had talked to me about both of these things during the last years of his life with the careful honesty of a man putting things in order. He had said once during a long evening on the screened porch 2 summers before he died that a house belonging to 3 people who wanted different things from it eventually belonged to none of them. I had not known at the time he was telling me something he had already decided. I understood it later. I called a real estate agent named Judith, who had been selling Lake Caro properties for 20 years. She walked through every room and gave me a number that made me sit down on the dock afterward for a long time. It was almost 4 times what Dennis had argued the property was worth during the will proceedings when he had been pushing for a 3-way split. I listed it in December. By the following Monday, I had 3 serious inquiries and 2 scheduled walkthroughs. I accepted an offer in January from a couple named the Hargroves, relocating from the city, wanting a primary residence on the water, not a holiday property. The sale closed in February, 14 days ahead of schedule, at a number that cleared all costs, and left me with a figure whose contrast with what a 3-way family negotiation would have produced was so stark it almost felt unreal. I did not tell Dennis and Carol. I want to explain that. Clearly because it is the part I have had to examine most carefully in my own head. I did not tell them because 2 separate attorneys had confirmed unambiguously that the property was legally mine, and the sale required no disclosure to or consent from my siblings. I did not tell them because Dennis had threatened to contest the will within hours of learning its contents, and I had no confidence that learning about a pending sale would not generate an attempt to delay or complicate the transaction, possibly through a temporary injunction that would have created exactly the kind of expensive, damaging delay I was trying to avoid. And if I am being completely honest, I did not tell them because part of me was angry in a way I did not know what to do with. I was angry at Dennis for deciding Dad's deliberate choice was a drafting error rather than a decision made by a man who knew his children. I was angry at Carol for her first instinct being her children's expectations rather than any acknowledgement that our father had the right to leave his own property to whoever he chose. The anger was not a legal argument and it was not the deciding factor. But it was present. The Hargroves sent me a photograph in March, 6 weeks after closing. They had replaced the dock, solid new timber with proper lighting along the edges, and a clean line railing my father would have spent an hour examining. They had left the screened porch exactly as it was. She said in the message that they had considered updating it, but it had a quality they did not want to disturb, a settled feeling. 8 months after the sale closed, Carol called on a Sunday evening and said she had been thinking about the house and wanted to discuss whether her family might buy my share out. I sat very still on the other end of the phone. Then I told her the house had been sold. The silence that followed was long enough to count heartbeats. She said, "What?" I said it had closed in February. The buyers were the Hargroves and they were using it as a primary residence. Carol made a sound I cannot accurately describe and went very quiet and said she needed to call me back. She did not call back that night. Dennis called at 9:45. He did yell. He said I had committed fraud, stolen family property, and he was calling a litigation attorney. I waited for him to finish and said the property had been left to me solely by our father's documented wishes, that I had consulted 2 independent attorneys prior to the sale who confirmed the transaction required no disclosure to or consent from him, and that the sale had been completed lawfully. He said the legal technicalities did not matter because I had deceived my own family. I said I had made a legal decision about my own property without announcing it in advance, and that those were different things. He said they were not, and hung up. Dennis filed a complaint with the State Bar Association alleging the attorney had failed to notify interested parties of a significant estate transaction. The Bar Association reviewed it and dismissed it within 6 weeks. Dennis then consulted a litigation attorney about a civil claim against me for fraudulent concealment. The attorney told him a property, specifically and solely bequeathed to one party in a valid will, was not a shared estate asset, and I had no legal obligation to notify anyone about a transaction involving my own property. The matter did not proceed further. Carol called 3 days after the initial conversation. Once she had gathered herself into a different shape of reaction. She said she was not angry the way Dennis was angry, but she needed me to understand what it felt like. 14 summers with her children, the belief that it would continue, a decision made without warning. I said I understood it felt that way and I was genuinely sorry for the pain of it. She said sorry was not the same as consultation. I said that was true and I had made a choice and was prepared to stand by it. She asked why. I told her the truth. I told her Dad had left it to me because he trusted me to make the right call for the property, not the easiest call for the family dynamic, and selling it to buyers who would actually live there and care for it properly was the right call. She said that was not her father's voice she was hearing. I said it actually was, and she could speak with the attorney if she wanted to understand the full picture of what Dad had communicated before he died. She did call the attorney. He told me afterward she had sat in his office for an hour and read through the notes my father had left, his private communications about his intentions and reasoning, the specific language he had used about each of his children, and why he had made the choices he made. He said Carol had cried for about 20 minutes of that hour, and then gone very quiet and then thanked him and left. The family Christmas that year was managed rather than relaxed. Dennis spoke to me when conversation required it, and not otherwise. Carol was warmer. but there was a deliberateness underneath the warmth that had not been there before. I sat through dinner and talked to my cousin Nora across the table and helped Carol clear plates and left at 7, slightly earlier than I might have otherwise, and sat in my car in their driveway for a moment before pulling away. I cried on the highway home, not about the house or the money or the legal situation, about the specific look on Dennis's face when I had walked through Carol's front door, the look that said I had moved from sibling into the category of person who had done something unforgivable, and about missing my father in the specific way you miss someone when a situation arises that they would have known how to manage and you are left managing it without them and doing it imperfectly. He had known this would happen. He had known and made his decision anyway and trusted me to carry it forward. Philip called in March with something he said he had been sitting on. He said that during one of Dad's final meetings, Dad had asked whether the structure he had put in place would actually protect the house from becoming a source of conflict between his children. Philip had said he could not make that guarantee. My father had been quiet for a moment and then said he understood and had made peace with the likelihood that it would create conflict in the short term, because the alternative, the house caught between 3 people who wanted different things from it, would have created conflict that was worse and longer and without resolution. Without resolution. He had used those words specifically. I held on to that the way you hold on to something a person leaves behind when they go. Not perfectly, not without losing it sometimes, but with enough intention that it was there when I went looking for it. The Hargroves sent another photograph in spring. The screened porch with new furniture, same placement as always, facing the water. They had found the hooks my father had put in the ceiling beams to hang lanterns at night and had hung their own lanterns in exactly the same spots, not knowing that was where the hooks had always been. Just following the logic of the space the way good spaces guide you without announcing themselves. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Then I saved it next to the first one and closed my phone and went about the rest of my day. My father built that house with his own hands and the help of friends who were paid in beer and Sunday dinners. He watched his 3 children grow up inside it and understood, and with the clarity that comes to people when the arithmetic of time becomes very clear, what each of those children was and what they would do with something that mattered if it was left to all of them equally. He did not make his decision from cruelty or favoritism. He made it the way he made everything, carefully, honestly, with a longer view than the people around him were always capable of seeing in real time. Some things he built are still standing. Some of them you can see in a photograph. Some of them you carry with you and only recognize when you need them, which is usually later than you would like and earlier than you feared.